I think that when we consider the power of nations, the thing that usually comes up first is military prowess, and that's usually followed by economic prowess. The truth is, there's a lot of factors in determining the power of a nation, but I think one thing that cannot be underestimated is how state media is used um, to weaponize information and to distort information for that matter. Now, I've been on record before as being very critical of RT, and I remain very critical of RT, and I want to talk about RT in this video. But let me just make a disclaimer. Um, the retort of RT defenders will be whataboutery. What about the BBC? What about CNN? What about this, that, and the other? My response to that is yes, all networks have a bias. Yes, you can find examples of selective reporting in every major network. But I'm not coming from a point of someone who's glowing in admiration for CNN or the BBC. I've been very vocal also in my criticism of those networks. However, you cannot say that either of those, because they're probably the two most prominent examples, are in any way comparable in terms of their closeness to respective governments. You cannot say that CNN is a stooge of the American government, and you cannot say that the BBC is a stooge of the British government. In fact, both have been accused of being against their own countries. RT was set up by Russian ultranationalists, and that is the line it's taken ever since. Now, I have to be honest, I have a very, very limited amount of patience for the useful idiots who defend RT and who can't see it for what it is. Every, and I can say that literally, every RT report that you see about Britain, France, Canada, the United States, or any Western nation has a negative angle. It will always be approaching Western society in a negative light. So we'll be trying to report about anti-government protests or even trivial things. I saw an RT report about an hour ago about a local bylaw in Bristol in the UK. I mean, it seemed like a very trivial thing, but RT will latch onto it like anything to try and make the West look bad. That is their agenda. Now, there is a school of thought. There are many people in the UK who I think gravitate towards RT because the BBC has been lazy and downright incompetent when it comes to reporting certain situations. For example, the grooming gangs. I think the BBC does have a major problem with cowardly political correctness, and I think that that means that people look at that and they say, oh, well, the BBC isn't covering this, RT is, therefore I'll gravitate towards that. But what you need to understand is RT is using the problems in our society to attack us. You might be tempted to think RT is doing it because they care about the victims. They don't. It's just because it makes the West look bad. Like, oh, look, these Islamist gangs are running rampage. Um, oh, in those cases, Pakistani, British grooming gangs. And you get that in every country. So there will be some people who gravitate towards RT because the BBC and CNN won't touch certain stories, and that's to their shame. I think that's wrong, and I've been very vocal about them not doing that. For one reason, it helps prop up RT. But I think RT is absolute poison. I hate it with every fibre of my being because I can see what it's doing. It is a weapon being used against Western states. It's a weapon of the Russian government, which is a hostile foreign regime. Putin, people say, oh, give Russia a chance, give Russia a chance. Putin has now been in power during the tenure of four American presidents and four British prime ministers. The problem is clearly not with the West, the problem is with Putin. And what I want to touch on is there was two RT correspondents, Liz Wahl, Abby Martin, and they gained fame for quitting on air, both related to the coverage of the Russian invasion of Crimea. And let's call it what it was the Russian invasion of Crimea. Um, Now, Abby Martin, unfortunately, her credibility is problematic because she had been part of a 9/11 Truth Commission. She works as an independent journalist, and I think in her case, she really is independent. I think by quitting on RT, she proved that. Um, but I wouldn't entirely trust her because looking at some of her background, she has a left wing agenda. So she's not quitting RT and gravitating towards liberal democracies. I mean, she's closely associated now. I said she's independent. Maybe I was wrong to say that. She's now associated with Telesur. I'm not going to say she works for Telesur, but she's associated with that, which is a mouthpiece of the Venezuelan regime. Um, I guess you could level that charge against any journalist working for any organization. I mean, Chinese nationalists always say British journalists are pawns of the British government, which is nonsense, actually, because the BBC is very critical of the British government. There's no comparison. Um, what I find notable about RT supporters is their incredible stupidity, their incredible lack of critical thinking, and they they think they're smart and open minded, but what they're not, because they're not sort of going to RT and saying, "Oh well, I don't believe everything RT says, but I don't like the BBC and CNN." No, they blindly support RT, and very often, if you look into their background, they tend to be Putin supporters. They tend to think Putin's a great guy. They tend to believe in conspiracy theories like 9/11 was an inside job, and the worldview tends to be either far right or far left, because curiously that's something both the far right and the far left actually have in common. They both tend to be cheerleaders for Russia for different reasons. um, in the case of the far left, it's because they hate Western neoliberalism, as they would call it, and they're still bitter that communism lost. In the case of the far right, they see Russia as the leading bulwark against pan-Islamist extremism, which I think is a dubious claim, um, but for different reasons. So they also tend to gravitate towards Russia because Russia doesn't get into identity politics, which is something I've no time for. But I can see what Russia is doing. And anyone that thinks RT isn't a weapon of the Russian state, I'm torn between feeling sorry for them as to how gullible they are, but also feeling, I have to be honest, very strong frustration because I think we're being attacked from within. And these useful idiots, Britons, Americans, Canadians who defend Russia, are just, they're stabbing their countries in the back. They're quislings and they're idiots and they cannot see it. It's just insufferable. So when I've just watched an interview with Liz Wahl on CNN, and I know people will say, "Oh, why go to CNN?" But regardless, she quit on air because of RT's coverage of the Crimea situation, and the amount of hate in the comments from RT supporters just goes to show that she was right to do that. She was naive in joining RT in the first place. She shouldn't have done that. But I give her respect for her courage in quitting on air. Now, this is something worth mentioning. The fact that both Liz Wahl and Abby Martin are American citizens is probably frankly kept them alive. If they were Russian nationals, they would have met an accident by now, just like what happened to Anna Politkovskaya and numerous other journalists critical of the Putin regime who have ended up dead. If they were Russian nationals, there's a very strong chance they would be dead by now, and that tells you everything you need to know about the Kremlin's behavior. I mean, let's just look over the last 10 years what Russia has done. A pretty brutal domestic human rights record, the invasion of sovereign Ukraine, and it goes well beyond the Western invasion of Iraq because that's actually an occupation of Ukraine long term, an annexation. The West never annexed Iraq. May have invaded Iraq, it did not annex Iraq and try to make it a 51st state. Russia invaded Crimea, 10,000 people have died in that conflict, and has claimed part of a sovereign nation as its own under the dubious pretext of protecting Russian speakers. Um, Russia armed rebels that shot down a civilian plane, killing 298 people, 298 innocent people. Russia has propped up a murderous genocidal dictatorship and is directly responsible as a result of tens of thousands of civilian deaths in Syria. And Russia has orchestrated a massive industrial scale media war against the West to vilify and defame the West at every opportunity. This is Putin's track record over the last 10 years. Oh, and how can I forget the Salisbury attack? Russia has arrogantly attacked um, a former spy on British soil, putting British citizens at risk, and then has the arrogance to joke about it. This is Russia's behavior over the last 10 years, and it sickens me to the core. But what I find more sickening than Russia's behavior, Russia was humiliated after the Cold War. Putin wants to make his country powerful. That's politics. But what I find sickening is the useful idiots in the West who defend this. I'm not talking about people who criticize Western policy. I'm not talking about people who have a problem with Trump or May or anything to do with the West. I'm talking about people who have a problem with the West, but then go out of their way to defend Russia. I think that's unforgivable. No, it's nothing to do with criticizing Western governments. I totally support that. What I'm saying is if you're criticizing Western governments and then acting as a useful idiot for Putin, then you deserve no respect.